Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Sadaqallahu al-azim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The session will be beginning with Ayah number 43 of Surah Yusuf. So Surah Yusuf, Ayah number 43. That's the entire ruku, but I'm going to work my way through some parts of that ruku, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقال الملك إني أرى سبع بقرات سمان يأكلهن سبع إجاف وسبع سنبلات خضر وآخر يابسات يا أيها الملأ أفتوني في رؤياي إن كنتم للرؤيا تعبرون. صدق الله العظيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this ayah, and the king, this is the ruler of Egypt at that time, the king said, indeed, I have seen in a dream, he had a dream which alarmed him. He said, I have seen in a dream 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 that were lean, and 7 green spikes of grain, and others that were dry. O eminent ones, explain to me my vision if you should interpret visions. So this is the king of Egypt at the time, and he has this dream, and he's alarmed by this dream because it's odd. The whole dream is odd. He sees 14 cows, 7 are well-fed cows, 7 are not. They're thin, emaciated, perhaps starving, perhaps dehydrated from lack of water. We don't know for sure. All we know is that they're in a very bad condition, malnutrition affecting them. And the king sees that these 7 cows that are in this state of malnutrition, they're thin, they eat the 7 cows, each one of the cows eats a cow, each thin cow, if you like, eats a fat cow. So all 7 lean cows eat all 7 fat cows. And it's odd because, of course, first of all, cows are not, they're not carnivorous. They don't eat other animals. But here, these cows are doing that. Firstly. Secondly, more importantly, the fact that thin ones would eat the fat ones, it doesn't seem right. So he's concerned, what does this mean? And then he sees the green spikes of grain and he sees 7 of them. And then he sees 7 that are shown to him in the dream that are dry. And again, perhaps due to lack of water, but they're dry, they're dead. So he asks his people about the explanation to this dream. Now, the translators put down eminent because in actual fact, what he does do is the king asks first one set of people, then another, because the first set of people he asks are his immediate advisors, and they are unable to explain to him what this is. They turn it down. So he then asks another set of people, and these are now, if you like, they're like his war cabin, and they can't explain it either. Then he asks the scholars amongst his kingdom, and they can't explain it. So he asks the wise people, and so on. So basically, he went through perhaps several different categories of people to find out what this means. And in the end, all of them came up with a blank that they didn't know what it meant. So let's have a look at this, inshallah. Allah Ta'ala directed the dream to the leadership. Why? Because that's where solutions, warnings, and plans come from. If there is something that's going to befall the entire people, which obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will know because He's the one who plans these things and decrees them, then there's no point in warning people that are in the lower ranks or just amongst the common folk. It will have no impact, no matter how true that dream is. It needs to be at a high level. And what better than the highest level? Because then when that dream is worked out, if there is a sign there that needs for action to be taken, a leader, a ruler, could command those actions to be taken, and the people can be benefited from it. So here the dream is directed at leadership because a change or a means needs to be instigated for the entire population. And of course, only the ruler, the king at the time, could have been in position to make such a thing happen. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directs the dream to the king. The second thing we understand from this is that the king was concerned for the meaning. He could have had a dream and left it be, but he doesn't. He doesn't know the meaning of the dream, but he does know there's something important about it. And as a result of that, he wants to know the meaning. And not just that, but he feels it's so important that he asks his immediate advisors and they can't answer it. So he goes to other people and they can't answer it, and he goes to other people. So it's really something that concerns him. And again, he doesn't know the meaning, but he, from what the dreams is showing him, realizes that this is something that's going to impact the people. Whatever it is, it's far more than a personal dream for his own personal life. So he shows that concern, which is a good thing for rulership, that they show concern for what might befall the people. Now, the dream contained cows and grain. These are the two things that the dream shows the king. Now, these two symbols are the symbols of prosperity in that age, in that time period. The symbols of prosperity for any nation was its livestock and its grain stock. So this is the two things which are symbolically shown to the king in the dream. And again, this is obviously something that he could perhaps take the two clues and realize this is going to be something perhaps on the verge of, if not, a famine. Now, he can't put his finger on it because there's no definition there. He needs that to be defined by someone who can interpret the dream. But he understands that these two are symbols, and everybody at that in those days, in that age, understood these two are symbols of our prosperity: cow and grain. By extension, the cow also meant obviously sheep, cattle, horses perhaps as well, camels. And in the case of the grain, it would be all the different kinds of grain that they may be growing. So it may not just be wheat, maybe barley, etc. But it represented all of that. And by extension from that, perhaps even the fruits, the figs, the olives, the whatever else that there was there, and even the products that are derived from that. For example, the olive would not just give you the fruit itself, but also the oil, and so on. So this was something that he understood was widespread, and because of the vividness of the dream, he needed to know what it was. So he asked one person after another, and nobody was able to provide it. Now, these two symbols were also important because Egypt, as a country at that time, was the breadbasket of the surrounding regions. So if there was to be a famine, if there was to be something happening to these two symbols, to the two prosperity symbols in Egypt, it would not just impact Egypt, it would impact all the neighboring surrounding regions who would also be relying on Egypt as the breadbasket, because they will be supplying, Egypt will be supplying all the neighboring regions, countries, etc. So it was central. And if something was going to go wrong, it wasn't going to just affect Egypt, but all the central line, outer lying regions. Now, that's how much it concerned this king. Let's compare that to the response of a later ruler of Egypt, the Pharaoh. Again, a similar thing happens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends a dream to the ruler of Egypt once again, but at a later time. At the time of Yusuf alayhi salam, the rulers were called kings. Later on, another dynasty comes in, overtakes the rulership, disposes of that rulership, and establishes itself, and those rulers call themselves pharaohs. So in the case of the king, this king in particular was quite a good leader. He was considerate of his people and tried to fulfill the needs of his people. Later on would come the dynasty of pharaohs, who were selfish and self-centered. And so when the pharaoh has a dream, again it's a dream of coming disaster, the pharaoh takes to wanting to know the meaning of the dream. And in his case, it's actually, he understands it because those people around at that time actually are able to interpret it to some extent and give him a meaning, which he then takes that meaning that it's going to take impact his own rulership. And as a result of this, what does he command? He commands the death of all baby boys that are born amongst the Hebrews, because he understands that a Hebrew will rise to challenge his leadership and destroy it. Now, it was not necessary. If we follow the story of Musa alayhi salam, which happened at that time, we can understand that Musa was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to Fir'aun to advise him, to warn him, to change him. And had he listened, then this disaster would have been averted and he would not have lost his rulership. His army would not have been killed and drowned in the river, but he would have succeeded. However, because of his own selfishness and because of his indifference to his people, he started to kill the babies and prevent this dream from happening and ended up, in actual fact, affirming the dream. In the case of the king, he is also warned of a disaster. In his case, he doesn't know the meaning. That's not interpreted for him immediately. But in his case, he's concerned about the people, and his response is very different. When Yusuf alayhi salam explains the dream to him, he decides to do something about it in the positive sense. He could have also responded in the negative sense. He could have said, okay, we will store grain in the kingdom and the palace will be saved. He didn't look at it that way. He wanted all people to be saved. So this is a contrast. Two rulers, both of Egypt, both are given dreams by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, warning of an oncoming disaster. The one is looking at the welfare of the people, and the other is looking at his own personal welfare. So just something to bear in mind, inshallah. So this is what I want to look at for this ayah for now, inshallah, in terms of its tafsir. There are various other issues as well, but I'm going to leave that for now, and I'm just going to look at this for now so that we can progress, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقال الملك إني أرى 7 بقرات سمان يأكلهن 7 إجاف و7 سنبلات خضر وأخرى يابسات يا أيها الملأ أفتوني في رؤياي إن كنتم للرؤيا تعبرون صدق الله العظيم. So now I want to look at this ayah and take a look at what it could mean for us today. So the king says, indeed, I have seen in a dream 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 that were lean and 7 green spikes of grain and others that were dry. O eminent ones, explain to me my vision if you should interpret visions or dreams. So the events in this section of Surah Yusuf are important for us today. This section that I'm dealing with now, inshallah, and the next few ayah, and I want to slowly, deliberately build up a series of a narrative, if you like, for what's going on with us, what has already started and what may conclude. And as always, the Quran is hidayah. That is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us. If we go back to the first ayah of the Quran, where the keys to the Quran are in the first ayah of Surah Baqarah and the second ayah, the first ayah being Alif Lam Mim, and then the second ayah which it describes that this is the book in which there is no doubt, guidance for the muttaqi. And it's this word guidance that's important. Many stories there are in the Quran, many events, many comparisons to even science and technology. However, the overall issue is hidayah, guidance, for any and every situation we find ourselves in. And right now, with all the fitan that we are seeing around us, there is no greater time for us to go back to the Quran and find the meanings for and find the solutions, find the guidance from the Quran for where we are and what we're experiencing than ever before. No greater time than now. So, in the Quran, we find the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. And it's not the only one. There are other aspects in the Quran which also help us to understand our situation today. But this narrative, this section in Surah Yusuf helps to build the picture of step by step. So the first step is in this event where the leadership understands what's going on. Now, the leadership can understand what's going on in 2 senses. One, they're given to understand something which they have no knowledge of, or 2, they understand what's going on because they are part of what's going on. They are a part of what's going on. They may not be 100% responsible for it, but they are a part of it. So, first thing I want to remind ourselves about is a righteous ruler will be concerned about his duty to his people. However, today we have unrighteous leaders who are in collusion to harm us, and we need to realize this. There are unrighteous leaders who are in collusion to harm us, and we need to realize this. And that's the important part which a lot of people haven't come to terms with, and as a result of which, The things that are happening around the world are happening more and more, and they're continuing to happen, and there is no stopping them. Although at the heart of the matter is simply a man or a couple of people who are in government or in all the different countries who are simply ruling these things, which can be seen to be harming the people, which can be seen to be taking the freedom and the human rights of people away, which can be seen to be damaging the economies, which can be seen to be damaging the infrastructure, and yet the people are taking it all on board and not doing what is obviously the direct thing that needs to be done, which is to stop this by stopping those people. So, if we had righteous rulers, they, like the king of Egypt, would be concerned about what is happening for the sake of the people. That's their duty. That's their responsibility. But if they're not righteous, then they'll all be concerned about themselves. As I said, the king could have said, once the dream was interpreted later on, as we all know from the story of Yusuf al-Islam, that we were stuck for the palace, the king's court and the king's people, and the rest of the people can fend for themselves. He didn't rule like that, and we'll look at that later on, inshallah. But he had a righteous response. Today, our leaders can see what is happening, and their instructions are not benefiting the situation. The instructions are actually there very much in principle, like the instructions of the Pharaoh, not the king, but the Pharaoh. So we are led by people who are of the second type, which I mentioned earlier, of the Pharaoh type, not the king type. So these guidelines, these rules, these things, the steps that they are taking are harming the people. Now, if we look at the Muslim leaders around the world of the Muslim countries, we all know they are not righteous. And if the Muslim leaders are not righteous without true belief in Allah Ta-aalaa, how is it then we expect righteousness from non-Muslim rulers? If Muslim rulers are not righteous, and this is the case with most of them, they will not be able to, their meetings, their infrastructure, their systems, they are designed upon Western models of parliament. They're not even Islamic models of their Khalifa and Shura. So how is it that if they are not being righteous and their rules in their countries are much the same as the rules in non-Muslim countries, especially during the last 4 or 5 years with the lockdowns and so on, all that was done in non-Muslim countries was done in Muslim countries. All that impacted the ibadah of Muslims in non-Muslim countries was done in Muslim countries. It was a shock for a lot of Muslims to see that Muslim countries did the same with the masajid, to close them, to have people pray in distances, to have people wearing masks when never did we have masks or anything covering the face in the salat. In fact, the fiqh has stated that even when we come to the Hajj, that sisters, women who wear niqab would have to remove the niqab in the haram for the salahs during the period of Hajj, etc. So yet here we are with everybody, man and woman, covering their faces with masks of one form or another and standing 6 foot apart. All of these things were done in Muslim countries with the sanctioned and overseen by Muslim rulers as much as they were done in non-Muslim countries by non-Muslim rulers. So if Muslim leaders did not give us righteousness because they themselves had little to none, how can we now expect righteousness from non-Muslim rulers? And when I'm saying this, I'm not saying every single ruler in the world, including Muslims for that matter, are unrighteous. Perhaps there may be some amongst them. I am aware, we are all aware of certain rulers that did go against the narrative in Africa, but they ended up in one form or another that they were no longer rulers, or they were removed from rulership, or rather they instead died under suspicious circumstances. So this is what happened to them. However, in Islam, we should understand that a person who stands up for righteousness, if such a person should die in that state, dies the death of a shaheed. And in our deen and our understanding, life and death is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How we live our lives, how we conduct ourselves, what we fight for, what we live for, what we believe in, all of these things are what's important. Our death will come whenever it's written, and that cannot be changed. That's regardless. It doesn't mean that the elite or globalists or whoever is in control is actually in control of our taqdeer, our destiny. No, they are not any more in control of our destiny as they are of their own destiny. All of us will die in our appropriate times, and all of us will face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all of us will look back upon our lives to see how we lived our lives. Was our life lived upon by the right principles, by righteousness, or by incorrect principles and unrighteousness? So, our leaders, Muslim or non-Muslim, on the whole, are in some kind of collusion. This kind of collusion is one where they are gathered together and they seem to be very well informed, very well connected, because every single country around the world is doing the same thing against its people. This is quite strange. Previously, if there's been some disaster or something, there have been certain different ways one country has done things as opposed to another. Yet there seems to be a very coordinated response, which is very similar throughout the entire world for every country, Muslim, non-Muslim, African, European, etc., Asian, wherever they are, same response. We need to therefore realize and understand that most of the present rulers have betrayed their people. That is important. We need to realize that. If we don't realize this, we will continue in the state we are in, the state which most people are doing. And what happens therefore is that the rulers will continue in their step-by-step increase of oppression of the people, of dhulm towards the people. Now, this may be a difficulty for many, but it has to be accepted in order for us to survive. And we have to understand this very much. We have to take this to heart. We have to reflect upon this. We have to stop. We've had enough time now, several years now, I'd say almost, where we can look at the step-by-step increase of dhulm and oppression upon us that's being done from the rulership. And regardless of which country we are in, it is being done to us. And regardless of which country we are in, it seems to be a unanimous global issue. So, Allahu Alam, how many of the rulers are in this? It seems to be all of them. Because even those we had some hopes for, at some point or other, did allow a large amount of the same guidelines for lockdowns and so on to occur in their countries, as did those who we know are part of the collusion with globalists. So many of these leaders also, another way to look at this situation is they are incompetent. Many of these leaders are incompetent, almost like a comedy. So the question arises, how did they get into positions of power? So for those of us that are having difficulty to believe that there is some kind of a global connection and cooperation, then how is it that incompetent people, senile people, bumbling idiots in some cases, people who cannot respond to simple questions, or people who are themselves caught out in difficult situations themselves, caught out in betraying the public, caught out in disobeying, breaking, violating their own guidelines of distancing and socializing. People who are caught like this, rulers, and yet they are continuing to rule. How did these people get into those positions of power? There was a time in the past where rulers were very competent people, the most intelligent, the most wise, the most courageous, the most determined. Those kind of people were leaders. They were able to speak for themselves. They were able to lead. They were able to inspire. They were able to be determined and show courage and tenacity. How is it that today we can have leaders of major power countries, first world countries, who are practically bumbling idiots, who cannot put sentences together to respond for themselves, whose behavior is ludicrous, almost like a clown, or senile? How is it possible? How is it possible such a man could be making decisions for a whole country when he can't even respond to simple questions from journalists or from the people? It doesn't make any sense, unless, of course, this was deliberate, that those people are put there, deliberately chosen as idiots, as fools, who would then respond and obey the rules of their superiors, who are the true people who are in charge of what is actually going on, but they are hidden. And what we see are the people that we think we have voted in, and we think they are responsible. But in actual fact, they are just the pawns of those who are the higher authority. This does not take away from our leaders their responsibility. No, they are responsible and they will be held accountable, yes. However, what I'm saying is that if we look at their incompetency, we must realize that these people cannot have been people that we voted in, and they could not have been something from the wisdom of the people. These are people that have been placed there, and we have somehow been coerced into causing them to become our rulers. And then all these idiotic decisions and these oppressive guidelines are now coming from that person, but not actually done by that person, but were handed to that person by a higher authority who is much more intelligent, who is strategic, who does know what's going on and can hold themselves in a conversation, but they are hidden from us. We should remember that there have been many good rulers, but many more evil rulers throughout history. This is something that has been happening throughout human history. There is the evidence itself again. For those people who think, no, governments and rulers, they can't really be wrong. They couldn't be doing all of this. They must be doing something right. And it must be just situations that they can't answer everything because it's a difficult job trying to manage the whole country. No, it's not for them. Each person in his own or her own situation is sufficient for their situation. The imam in a masjid is sufficient for that imam. He is qualified and experienced enough, skilled enough to rule over his congregation. The Khalifa over his Khilafat, the Amir over his Amarat, and so on. The President, the Prime Minister, the King, the Queen, whoever, wherever a person is in rulership, they are in rulership, they are qualified and skilled to do so. And that has been the case throughout history. Whether they are good or evil is another matter, but they have been sufficiently capable of ruling over the people in that position. So we cannot say today that there are so many things wrong, that it's too much for the government or too much for the Prime Minister or the President, etc., and so he's going to make mistakes. No, not this extent of mistakes. And don't forget, it's not as if it's just one man's decision. He has a cabinet. He has advisors, just as the king in Egypt did, and just as the Pharaoh did in his time. They all had advisors and supporters, and they, of course, have the ability to put people in positions to take care of things on their behalf and report back to them so they don't have to themselves have the headache. So that's not an excuse. Whoever is Prime Minister, whoever is the President, whoever is the King is responsible and should be accountable, should be held accountable. So there have been good rulers. Sulaiman alayhi salam as a prophet was a ruler. Dawood alayhi salam as a prophet was a ruler. These people were rulers and they ruled in a magnificent manner. Dhul Qarnayn was a ruler and he ruled in a magnificent manner. The one who traveled to the other sides of the earth and met the Ya'juj Ma'juj and blocked them with the wall that was built out of iron and covered with copper. He was a great ruler. So these were all grand and good rulers. The Khulafa Rashidin were great rulers. So all of these were good rulers, and at the same time we have the Pharaoh. We have Namrud, who Ibrahim gave dawah to. We have Nebuchadnezzar or Nebuchadnezzar, who imprisoned and enslaved the Hebrews at that time. We have many others who were evil rulers who did much harm to mankind. We have from modern and prehistory. So there were bad rulers as well as good rulers, and there were bad rulers that it caused oppression upon the people. So there's enough of those examples for us to understand this is what is happening today, except the physical person who is the ruler is not the person. It is beyond that person, somebody else who is holding the strings of this person. So in any case, this person we must do something about and change that person for a better person. And we have to have the courage to take that step, and we have to have the intelligence to understand this. As for the rulers, I want to look at a hadith and I want the rulers to understand this, inshallah. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ما من رجل يلي أمر عشرة فما فوق ذلك إلا أتى الله مغلولا يوم القيامة يده إلى عنقه فكه برؤه أو بقه إثمه أو أولها ملامة وأوسطها ندامة وآخرها خزي يوم القيامة. صدق الرسول. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no man is given authority over 10 people or more, but that he will come to Allah on the day of resurrection with his hands in shackles up to his neck. His freedom is his righteousness, or his imprisonment is his sin. The first of it is blame, the middle of it is regret, and the last of it is disgrace on the day of resurrection. This is a very profound hadith for any ruler, in any capacity, be it the husband in a home, be it the imam in a masjid, be it the king or president. This is a hadith that is very important. That no man is given authority over even just 10 people, but that he will come to Allah on the day of resurrection with his hands shackled, everyone, good or bad. And if they did righteousness, then that will be freedom. But if they did unrighteousness, then that will imprison them. And in the dunya, they will experience blame first, which many of these prime minister presidents do, and then they will experience regret, which they do when they're ousted from their positions. But it's not over. On Yawm al-Hisab, they will face the disgrace from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all leaders will face Allah ta'ala in a state of imprisonment. Righteousness will release and honor those who are just leaders. Oppression will condemn those who are unjust. And the unjust will suffer blame and regret in this life and punishment in the next. That is a warning to all, especially our Muslim rulers. Continuing the lessons for us, we need to be aware of what is happening. We need to understand what is happening in the world. We need to step back and realize that these aren't events which are just random and it's just like we're just going through a bad time. No, these things are deliberate. In fact, a lot more has been deliberate for many, many decades, perhaps hundreds of years. Those who are truly aware will understand that. But if we cannot understand what's been going on, has been going on for decades, has been planned and implemented for maybe over 1,000 years, then at least understand what's been happening in the last 5 to 10 years is deliberate. We need to listen beyond the news. The news is in the hands of the elite. They want to give us certain information, and they're giving that information which controls our behavior, controls our response, to keep us in line with how they want us to respond and what they want us to believe. So we must take the news as just a pinch of salt, and then we must look beyond the news and see what's going on from other informed people. And coming to that, we must not instantly dismiss information that does not agree with the media. Once we start looking beyond the news, once we start researching, once we start looking at other avenues and other resources and other sources, we mustn't dismiss that, especially if someone comes to us who's done some research and tells us that actually this is what's going on and this is what's going on. And we don't behave in this manner, that we instantly dismiss it and declare it to be some kind of misinformation and so on. And the classical conspiracy theory idea. This is labeling. It's psychological. It's part of the elite's plan, and we must stop doing that. There is no conspiracy theory. There are conspiracies, yes, and we should understand that from the Quran itself, because the Quran tells us that they conspire, and Allah knows that, and Allah has His own plan which will override their plan. So there Allah Ta'ala is telling us that they plan or conspire, and Allah has His plan, and it overrides their plan. That's the thing here. We are told by Allah that there is such a thing. They do conspire. There are evil people in the world who conspire, and they have done that in the time of every single one of the prophets, including Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So much conspiracy was going on behind Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam back, but Allah Ta'ala through Jibreel would inform Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and save him from that, or he would make decisions that remove the conspiracy from impacting negatively. People are given warnings also of coming hardships, and this is a mercy from Allah Ta'ala which should not be ignored. The king had a dream. That's a mercy. Yes, there was a disaster coming, and he didn't have to have that dream. Allah Ta'ala didn't have to give that warning. So he would never have taken the steps that he did to alleviate that warning and its impact upon him and the people. Yet he did take that step, and which is telling us what? That Allah Ta'ala will give us warnings, like the king was given. For us, our warnings are what has already happened. Perhaps we were warning before that from previous situations, but each situation is a warning for us that this is happening and worse is to come, or it will lead to worse if you just extrapolate it and understand the steps that are being taken. And that is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because until we are, so long as we are alive, so long as we are surviving, we are in a position to do something about what's going on. Otherwise, our living, our human rights being stripped from us, our social rights being stripped from us, is going to become more and more, and we are going to become so restricted. Life itself, living itself, will become difficult, and we'll have no one to blame but ourselves. So we need to understand when we see the warning signs, and we need to wake up to it. And if we are not capable of doing something, at least support those who are. If we can't do something ourselves, at least support those who are. And be open-minded about what's going on, and do not accept simply what we are being told by the television, by the media. This is a controlled aspect. All of the media is in control of the same people who are putting out to the world all the different situations and scenarios that we are seeing that is causing such chaos in the world. Be it the prices of fuel, be it the price of food, be it the impact upon farmlands, be it the impact upon farming, be it the impact upon animals, be it the impact upon the environment, be it whatever is being told to us, which is actually a means to control our behavior. So if we are being told there is something wrong, such as the environment and pollution and so on, I would not accept that. That is from the media. I would look out at what is actually happening. I would look for and research and find out what needs to take place if there truly is an economic or an environmental disaster. What actually needs to take place? And I would find out, even those things that are being shown, that they are not mere accidents. For example, many factories have been on fire in the last several months. It is coincidental, is it, that all of those factories that have been on fire were food manufacturing factories? Can that truly be so? So many factories catching fire, and all of them are food manufacturing factories? Can it be a coincidence that suddenly we have to cull thousands of birds because of bird flu all of a sudden, but we see no evidence of it? But we had to cull 17 or so thousand chickens in the country. How is that so? Where was the evidence for it? Why was it done so quickly? So we need to ask questions and not just accept what we're being told. What we need to reflect on in the wake of all this is about our rulers. Our rulers come from amongst us and maintain their power through us. If we become better, our rulers will become better in the sight of Allah Ta'ala. Now that could mean that our rulers themselves will change, the individual will change. It could also mean that over time, the rulers that we have will be better people. Because ultimately, these rulers that we have, they are people coming from the community. They grow up in that community and they go from rank to rank until they're in a position where they can be voted in to become rulers. But they ultimately come from the community. If the community is a community of righteous people, then the person who comes forward to become a ruler will be from that righteous community and will himself be righteous, as the king was in the time of Yusuf al-Islam. And if not, then there will be oppressive people, because ourselves in the community, we are also selfish and oppressive upon one another. So when we are people of oppression and selfishness, we are materialistic, we are away from the deen, then our rulers will be similar. And if our lack of deen is causing oppression upon our wives, upon our children, upon our husbands, upon our families, upon our congregation, because of the different positions that we hold, then those same people, when they become rulers of the country, of the nation, will bring that oppression upon the whole of the nation. So we need to correct ourselves. And once we correct ourselves, then inshallah, that person who ends up coming to the rulership will be from amongst the righteous people, and we'll have righteous rulers over us, inshallah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to understand the warnings, the hints, the clues that I've put in this video today, inshallah. And I'll continue with the next few series in this, inshallah, to build up the picture and the narrative of what is going on in the world and how we understand this from the story of Yusuf al-Islam. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.